Hey everyone, it's David Chen. I'm here today on the YouTube channel at youtube.com/DaveChensky to discuss Celine Song's debut film, Past Lives. Joining me today for this conversation, she is a filmmaker and a movie critic at the Grio, Brooke Obie. Thanks for chatting with me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Let's talk about Past Lives, which is currently out in limited release. I'm going to read a very brief and vague plot summary from the movie. We're going to talk about our overall thoughts, and then we're going to move into full spoilers and talk about some thoughts on how the movie played out and specifically the ending of the film. But we'll start with no spoilers. Celine Song's Past Lives is about Nora and Hae Sung, two deeply connected childhood friends who are rest apart. WREST, rest apart after Nora's family emigrates from South Korea. Decades later, they confront destiny, love, and the choices that make a life. Brooke Obie, this is a movie I think you're a huge fan of. I believe there's a poster of the movie behind you, if I'm
Yes,
not
there
mistaken.
is. I don't
Yeah,
know if you can
it's
totally
behind
see
her
it, but
behind her shoulder. She just
yes.
acquired it. So you are a fan of this movie. What did you think of Past Lives overall?
I thought it was one of those things that reminds you why you love going to the movies in the first place. It is about possibility, and that possibility can, manifest in real ways in your lives. And this is a film that reminds you that love is real. It lasts over decades. It stretches across continents. It was just such a beautiful, well-made film that just feels like the best film that I've seen this year.
Wow, yeah. I have also recently ranked it as my number one film of 2023 so far. We'll see. Got another 6 months left to go. I was also a huge fan of this film. The way I've been talking about it is that most immigrant films, movies about immigrants, are about what happens after the immigrant person arrives in the new place, and it's like, oh, life is amazing and wonderful and new opportunities and everything like that. And Past Lives is about what happens to all the stories that were interrupted after the person left. Like, they tell the story from the perspective of the immigrant person, but what about the people who didn't immigrate, right? Like, and that's kind of what Past Lives delves into. It does both, right? It tells the story of Nora, who immigrates to Canada and then the United States, but also Hae Sung, who is left behind, and it asks all these questions of like, what if, like, what would my life have been like with that person if they hadn't left, and things of that nature. It's also just beautifully shot. Like, a lot of the times that these characters are being filmed, they're in a city, and you really get a sense of like how these people are situated in their environment in a way that is both comforting but also alienating at the same time. And the performances are really amazing. Like, it's a very understated film. It's not super plot heavy. There's no action. There's no set pieces or anything like that. It's just people hanging out and chatting, and reflecting on the nature of their lives and the decisions that they've made. So I was also a big fan. But we can't really talk about the movie in detail without spoiling it. And, the trailers have been very vague about what is actually going on in the movie. So I think from this point forward, let's just say we're going to spoil everything. Okay.
Great.
Um, so let's talk about a few specific elements of Past Lives that I think are worth covering. Let's start about. I want to talk about like the opening. Let's talk about some
Mhm.
of the time jumps, and then let's talk about the ending. Those are some things that stick out to me. But the opening of the movie, pretty interesting, huh, Brooke? Like, it's a weird conceit. You're seeing the main characters in the movie, and other people talk about them as the camera kind of pushes in, and then the main character Nora looks at the camera before it
Yes.
cuts away. And I'm curious, like, what was your reaction to that scene, Brooke?
Oh, I was in immediately because, for one, that is a game that I play with
Yes,
people,
totally.
at the restaurant, like trying to guess who these people are. And so, yeah, you could see by like the body language between, Hae Sung, that it was just, it was hard to tell who these three people were to each other. There were these two Asian people, one white man, and the two Asian people were facing each other. I think at one point, she Nora puts her arm, like she's totally blocking out the white man. She's just completely
Right.
engrossed in this conversation. And so, yeah, having them, try to guess who was who, and why they were all together, was very interesting. But then, yeah, to get that moment when Nora's looking directly into the camera, I was like, yes, I'm in. Tell me, what's the story?
Right. Yeah. I think uh that's exactly the intention of what the filmmaker wanted. And I actually had a chance to interview Celine Song. I'll link to that interview in the description. Check it out at decodingeverything.com. But she said basically, a lot of the film is autobiographical, and she was in a bar in reality in this situation in her own life, and she was seeing people look at her and wondering what their situation is, and the movie is an invitation to, like, hey, let me what if I could tell you what it was like to be me, what if I could tell you this story. um and I'm always a fan of whenever, like, a movie breaks the fourth wall like that, where, like, literally the main character Nora looks into the camera. It's very, like, arresting moment. um so anyway, we then start with the childhood of Nora and Haesung, uh and then Nora leaves South Korea and she's very excited about it, because according to her, you can't win a Nobel Prize for literature in South Korea. Um, and there's some really beautiful imagery here. Like, there's this moment when they say goodbye to each other. He just says goodbye, and then she, like, walks up the staircase in a different direction
Yes.
than her. And
It was
it's
like showing the difference between like where their trajectories were
yeah.
going. Like he says when he grows up, he's an ordinary guy. He's just walking on the straight path, and she's on the rise. Like she's going up those stairs. So it was really great
Hmm.
foreshadowing too. I loved that.
It also made me think about, like, how kids process saying goodbye to each other. Do you know what I mean?
Mm,
Like young people process saying goodbye, because it's not the same way as adults do it, right? Adults
mhm.
would, like, if we were saying goodbye for the last time, I would, like, say a bunch of stuff here. Here's how I feel about you, and here's my you can have my cat bed or whatever. Like, all this, like, there's all this stuff we'd say, and then, like, but it struck me that sometimes children don't really have the tools to process or deal with that, and I felt like the way their relationship abruptly ends, when their children kind of reflected that. I don't know how you feel about that.
For sure. I mean, so I was, a military kid. So I said goodbye quite a bit to a lot of people growing up. And yeah, and especially during this time too, where there's no social media, and it
Yeah,
does
yeah.
seem like it's the end forever. So I feel like there's this element of like adults knowing we have phones, we can get a phone card, like
Right,
it
right.
doesn't, but there is no real way. I mean, I think, Nora's mother did a really good job of being like, hey, we're going to leave. So do you want to go on a date with this kid? Like, let's make that happen, which I thought was really beautiful. But like, yeah, there was this, it was a finality that I guess they didn't really have an opportunity to process, and they definitely didn't have the language to process. So it was really heartbreaking, like right from the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. Flash forward 12 years into the future, I think it is, right? And then Nora is in college, or it might be grad school, right? I think, actually.
Was this
Uh,
2012?
yeah, I
The
think so.
2012
Yeah,
time? Yeah,
yeah,
she's in
yeah,
grad school.
yeah. And she is in grad school, and Haesung is in the military, and they reestablish contact via Facebook, and then they start Skyping, and their relationship kind of blossoms for a little bit, and then she decides, hey, I can't keep doing this, because um, I need to be focused on my life here, as opposed to looking up plane ticket prices to where you are.
But I felt like it wasn't even so much that. Like, I felt like if he had put a little bit more effort into it, then she wouldn't have felt so dumb. Like, I feel like, as a woman who's been like, hey, yeah, when are you going to come see me? And have the guy be like,
Mm-hmm.
why would I do that? She's
Uh-huh,
like,
uh-huh,
well,
uh-huh.
why am I over here like looking up flights and you're not even, and I don't think that that was his intention. Like he
Interesting.
obviously
Okay.
very, very much like loved her, but he did not at any point in time until it was, spoiler alert, too late. He was not expressing things in the way that would make her feel comfortable being
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, let's keep this long distance thing going. That's very hard on both of us. We're missing each other's calls. The connection isn't great sometimes. It's midnight here and the next day there. Like if he was giving more, I feel like she would not have said that. But
That is
she straight.
Yeah.
He said I'm going to China. I'm going to learn Mandarin. Like I don't need to learn English. Why would I learn English?
I
I
see.
feel like he
Interesting.
gave her all the clues. It was like,
That's an interesting perspective, bro. That's not how I read it. That's not how
how
I
did
read
you
it.
read it?
Well, I mean, I read it as they're both in logistical circumstances that would prevent them from kind of being together easily,
Mhm.
and that's what she was kind of pushing back against, not his lack of proactivity. I think you're right that if he was more proactive, he could have prevented this outcome. But I don't think like that's why she was. I think she was like, we're living separate lives. There's no chance that these lives can be the same at any point in the near future, and that's why I can't do this anymore. That was my perspective. Not like you're not doing enough. I do think you make a good point that I think it's true that a lot of guys are not proactive in their relationships, right? Like even in budding online relationships, and it seemed like certainly this guy Hae Sung was like I would say resigned to like whatever the current circumstances were. But anyway, that's my interpretation. It's a little bit more generous to Hae Sung, is what I'm saying. But
I feel because at the point where she was like, "How long is it going to take you to see me?" He's like, "Well, I'm going to China. I'm learning." And she's like, "You don't need to explain. It's cool. A year and a half. I'm not waiting that
yeah,
long.
yeah, yeah,
See it when I see it." But
yeah.
she did actually wind up going to Korea, and he did not answer her email. So I feel
That's
like
true.
there's twice where he dropped the ball. You know?
Fair enough. Fair enough. One of my favorite shots in the whole film that I've seen this year happens during this sequence because she goes on this writer's retreat, and she is kind of sleeping in bed, and then this white dude shows up, and the white dude's arrival is signified by like this wind blowing through her curtains. I don't know if you remember that. Like
Yeah,
it's just like this wind, and you can feel it's like the wind of like her life, like an inflection point in her
changing.
life is changing,
Yeah.
right? Um, so I really love that portion of it. Now I will say I found Arthur to be kind of a very underwritten in this film. I didn't really understand what the appeal was, like what's going on there, and I didn't know if it was supposed to be underwritten by design or if it was just like they could have fleshed that character out better. But what did you think of the character of Arthur who plays uh, Nora's boyfriend and then husband?
So, oh, I I think you're probably right, and it's a little concerning too because it is autobiographical. So like, they have a conversation about it. He's like, "You make my life so much bigger. Like, what do I
Mm-hmm.
do for you?" And she was like, "You do the same, honey." Like, it's very like I don't know. I really don't know. He gives
Mm-hmm.
her notes on her plays.
Yeah, yeah,
I don't. Yeah, we didn't really see enough even in there, like we saw that they spent a lot of time together that first night, that there was obviously like an attraction there. I think the chemistry was there between the characters, but yeah, as far as he's a little underwritten, and I'm actually okay with that. I think the purpose was to show that she is content in her life, she has love in her life,
right.
and she didn't necessarily make the wrong choice, and
Yeah, yeah.
so,
That's how I feel. That kind of ambivalence that you're describing is what I picked up from her character throughout the movie. Later on, 12 years later, they have this conversation in bed, and he says like, "You make my life so much bigger," and da da da. And or there's other scenes where Arthur gives her the opportunity to kind of reaffirm her commitment, her affection for him, or explain that he's someone who excites her in some way, and she doesn't take it. Like one of the moments when that happens is later on in the movie, when she's talking about, or he makes a joke like, "What are you going to do? Like run off with this guy?" And she doesn't say, "I would never." She says, "I'm not going to miss rehearsal for this dude."
yes, she's like, I have a play in production.
Right,
Like,
right,
why would I mess up my life for a man? Like,
right. But
not
it's
even
not.
you, not
But it's
even
not.
my husband.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's not like no. Of course, I'm committed to you, and we love each other. It's like, I'm not going to let some random guy mess with my production. Brooke, you're currently working on, a film right now. Would you let some random guy mess with that?
Please, never. Which
So,
I unfortunately did. See, that's the thing. This movie was
mm,
extremely triggering for me because
yeah, okay.
somebody did come back into my life 13
Mm,
years later, last year. And I was working on a movie, and he was like, oh no, let's do something together instead. And I put my movie aside. And I was working on this other thing with this person, and it did not work out. So I was 100% triggered by this by this movie. And yes, good for Nora. Sad for her husband, but good for Nora.
yeah,
Stick to
but
those
I think in
guns.
that moment when she's like, I think it's a deflection when he's like,
For
"Are you going
sure.
to run away with this guy?" She could have said, "No, of course. Why would? No, of course not. I love you. I don't like this guy at all." But she's like, "I'm not going to let some guy ruin my play." Like that. Yeah.
I thought it was so beautiful because like they were very like everybody was so honest. Like nobody lied the entire
Mm-hmm.
movie, I don't think.
Yeah.
Um
Mm-hmm. Okay.
and I thought that that was such a great sign
Yeah,
of
yeah. She
like
yeah she didn't
respect.
like straight up lie to him
Yeah.
about it. Yeah, yeah.
They even when, he when she came back from their first date together, which was also very beautiful, and is telling Arthur about it, and she's like, "Yeah, you were right. He came here to see me. He's not here on vacation." Like there's no secrets here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that is, a safety that has to be, maybe that's what Arthur provides, a safety where she can be honest and be herself. And I really appreciated seeing that on screen. This has to be, I think, the healthiest group of people I've ever seen on
In a
screen.
love triangle.
Yes.
This is the healthiest love triangle that we've seen on screen. The but would you agree with my assessment that like I think she is at least somewhat ambivalent about her life choices, like and that comes through in the movie.
For sure, for sure. I think because she believes in this idea of Inyan, that there is a fate, there is a destiny, and if this person keeps coming back into your life, and you still have these same like strong feelings that you've had since childhood, like that can't be nothing. Like that has to be something. There has to be a reason for that. I do think she's confused as to what maybe the reason is, and she's kind of resigned herself that the reason is to just, I don't know, show her that that's possible. That was it for me, at least. Like watching it, I'm like, oh, this is a possible thing that can happen. You can be loved really, really well by multiple people throughout
Mm-hmm.
over your lifetime.
Right.
Like
Right.
that's lovely, and maybe that's enough.
Mm-hmm.
So I think
Mm-hmm.
that's what she's kind of like wrestling with. Is like, this does not mean I need to end my life and like go to Seoul and be with this person, but
Right. Right. Well, so let's talk about that final portion. Right. We flash forward another 12 years into the future. Haesung is coming to New York to visit for a few days. Specifically coming just to visit Nora. And they go on basically like a series of dates in New York, all of which are just filmed very beautifully. Like I think they do a lot of the touristy things in New York City.
But have you ever
Uh,
seen it look that beautiful? I'm like, I've done all of
yeah.
those things, and it did not look like that when I did it.
You've done all those things with the guy who interrupted your movie you were working
No,
on,
not that.
and it was and it wasn't as good.
Well,
Um,
yes, for sure, it was not.
but yeah, and again, I interviewed Celine Song for Decoding Everything, and she shot this movie on film, and it
Gorgeous.
looks amazing. It was a worthy choice, particularly like a lot of the scenes that take place at night. I mean, you can tell just by watching the trailer; it's a beautiful movie, And so, who hasn't been to New York City and had a torrid romance with someone, or quasi romance, like will they or won't they romance? Um, what did you make of their interactions? I guess I'm curious. Like, what did you think of the relationship between Nora and Haesung? Did this strike you as a plausible or interesting romance? What do you think?
100%, because like for one, they have amazing, like the actors had amazing chemistry together.
I think so.
And
Yeah.
like when you think of like, even like the best sex scenes of the year, like there was nothing, they didn't even like touch. And it was so incredibly beautiful and romantic. I was just like swooning the whole time. There was long spaces of silence, and they didn't have to communicate with words. Like that was just, I don't know, I feel like Celine has painted, this impossible ideal of like what romance can be, like that you don't even have to, you are so in tuned on like a spiritual vibrational level that you don't even have to talk. Like
Yeah.
most of the time they weren't talking. I think, that's one of the things you were talking about earlier as far as like, how minimal the movie, like the
Hmm.
dialogue is minimal as well. But when they do talk, it's funny, it's great. Like they have, great rapport. Um, you know, they just seem to really understand each other and are able to fill silence or just sit in silence in a way. I think that was part of, what she was explaining to her husband about what was so great about Hae Sung when they were kids. Like he would just sit there and watch her cry.
Hmm.
Um, and I feel like, yeah, there's kind of just like an unspoken thing that I thought was really, really beautiful and really well done.
There are a lot of silences in the movie, and a lot of the dialogue scenes play out in like a single shot, a two shot, basically, where you see both actors or will pan back and forth, um, and it really lets you feel the kind of pacing of these conversations. There's no like shot reverse shot cut. It's just like, hey, camera is on these two people for like 3 minutes or whatever. We're going to see how this interaction plays out, and I do think it's largely very lovely. One of my favorite shots in the movie is when Hae Sung's about to leave and he comes back to Nora's apartment and meets Arthur. And there's this look on Arthur's face at that moment, in my opinion, that was just what it communicated was, oh, now I get it. Like now I understand because Hae Sung's a good looking dude. Do we
Yeah,
agree Hae Sung's a good looking dude?
he's a
And
great
so it's
looking dude.
like and so it's like,
I can't
okay,
compete,
I
which he
can't. Yeah,
already understood. He
exactly.
can't compete.
Exactly. That's kind of what I think. That's you have the same reading of it as
Yeah,
me then, which is
yeah,
like, oh, I get why this is a thing in our lives right now. Like I
yeah.
understand why this is happening. Um, and then they kind of go off to the bar and they have the conversation. We see the scene from the opening shot of the movie played out again, but from a different perspective. And this is kind of the culminating scene in the movie, or one of the culminating scenes in the movie. Um, but yeah, I'm curious if you had any thoughts on this bar sequence, and then we could talk about like basically one of maybe it's the second to last shot of the film where like they kind of walk and he drives off in an Uber. But
Oh yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
but yeah, what'd you think of these final sequences and how they played out?
so what I really loved about, I don't think we've talked about this yet, was the, being able to speak in Korean. Nora is, not speaking in Korean as much. She only speaks it with her mom, I think she says at one point. And so she has this person that she can reveal, all of herself with. And that's another issue that Arthur has, that, she dreams in Korean and he tries to learn Korean because he wants to understand her dreams and he wants to be able to understand that part of her that's kind of separate, that she doesn't have the same issue when it comes to Hae Sung. Like he already understands that. So having them at the bar, and like at one point, Hae Sung is trying really hard to speak English so that Arthur can understand. But, at one point they just give up and they're just like, it's me and you. Let's speak Korean. He doesn't understand. And that's great. And we can actually have a
Right,
real
right,
conversation
right.
about like what would our lives have been if like, you know, and they were both talking about the fact that like, well, I tried to come, I tried to get you, but you were married, and then well, you had a girlfriend, like, so whose fault is it, that we couldn't connect? And there was a
Yeah,
conversation that they could not actually have in English. And I just thought it was really, really beautiful that, they had that space, and that Arthur also allowed them the space to have that conversation too, and just like be like,
yeah.
y'all have things you need to work out.
Right, right.
And
It's
this is
very
a
mature, very
private,
mature, a very mature depiction of this kind of situation, right? Yeah.
the health of all of these individuals is just
Yeah,
so aspirational.
uh, yeah, I liked it a lot too. I did feel like she was, excluding him a little bit, and that was, I try to bring people in, like, for instance, my brother is married to someone who's Korean. And whenever my parents are around, they'll speak like Chinese to us. And I'm always like trying to translate. I'm always trying to like say, my mom is saying that, my dad's saying, I want everyone to be included. So when she just kind of like froze out Arthur at the end, I was kind of like, okay, on the one hand, that's necessary because they need to work this stuff out. And on the other hand, kind of inconsiderate to Arthur. The but I think like for people such as myself, who come from a culture or a country that speaks a different language, we have been in that situation before,
Mhm.
where it's like you're kind of in this weird space where like the reason these people are here, not I haven't been in this particular love triangle situation, but like the reason these people are here and together is because of you, right? Like there's no reason these people will be hanging out otherwise, but you're there and you're kind of this nexus of who they are and why they're here. And I thought this movie captured kind of uh a flavor of that, right? What that feels like. And in that bar scene is a great example of it.
And I think
um
too, for Arthur as like a white guy, he's probably not used to having to do that. Like the
yeah,
immigrant experience, that is a very common situation, you
absolutely,
know.
yeah.
And so yeah, I feel like in his like it's a choice. Like he chose to be there. He chose to kind of like welcome the awkwardness in a way because he also knew that he couldn't really stop it. So, but I think the other really beautiful part about that scene is when she leaves and Hae Sung again tries to resume English, and
Hmm.
like they have that conversation about how the two of them have Inyan too. Like, there's no reason why the two of them
Hmm.
would be there in this really awkward, uncomfortable, painful situation for both of them, if they weren't also destined to be in that situation too. So I thought, yeah, I loved that last scene, and the role that language played in bringing all those themes across.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the penultimate scene. Final plug for my interview with Celine Song at decodingeverything.com. But she talked with me about shooting this scene. I asked her what was the most difficult scene to shoot in the movie. She said this is one of them. And I'm talking about the scene where Nora escorts Haesung to the part of the sidewalk where he needs to wait for his Uber. That's the scene. And apparently they had to close off the whole block. They had to lay down 150 feet of track for the camera to go on, so it could have that nice smooth camera motion. And they kind of look at each other. They stare longingly into each other's eyes for a bit, and then the Uber arrives, and then they exchange some final words. Haesung drives away, and then Nora starts crying. It's all done basically in one shot. I do think it cuts back when the Uber arrives, but yeah. And then Celine Song was telling me how having Nora break down crying, she had to do that multiple times because they don't just do one take for movies, and that was very, very challenging. But I'm curious what you thought this scene meant, Brooke. Why do you think? What was behind that crying? What was behind? What was in the looks that they shared with each other? What was going on here, in your opinion?
I mean, I think the last thing that he said to her was that, what if? I mean, for one, right before they even start talking, they're kind of like turning more and more gradually towards each other,
Yeah,
and they
yeah,
finally are just like eye to eye.
yeah,
And she's actually like, the wind is blowing, like you can see her skirt. She's got a slit in her skirt, so you can
yeah.
see the wind is like pushing her towards him, which is also really awesome. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but like, if not, like the weather was on their side. Like
Hmm.
it's pushing her towards him, and like it looks like maybe they're about to kiss, and then they don't. But the last thing that he says to her is, what if this is a past life?
Yeah.
And
What will
in
we
our
be in the next life?
yeah,
Right.
what
Yeah.
if we're already something else to each other? And so I think she's mourning. I think she's mourning the possibility
Yeah.
of what life could have been. I think she is. Uh, I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of. I think she probably feels guilty too for the feelings that they
Yeah.
definitely, if that Uber hadn't come, I guarantee you they would have been kissed. Like, I feel like there's some guilt in there too, because she has to now
Hmm.
like do the walk of shame home to her husband, and now it's all
Who
revealed
is
through
who is sitting there the whole
who's
time? By the
sitting there. He's
way.
sitting there.
Yeah.
He pretended like he was going in the house, but he definitely was sitting. He was like, she's taking a bit too long, and got right back on that porch. And like, I think that's another thing too. Like, she is now fully open to her husband. Like, he is aware that there is somebody else in the world that has a connection with her that he can never have and he can never understand. And her love for him is not going to diminish that in any way, and now they have to deal with that. Like, he's gone, but she's still here with her husband, and now
Mm,
they have to, like, they have to deal with that moving forward, and what is that going to look like, and how is that going to change her life. So I
yeah.
think it's all of those things.
I agree. I basically had like almost the identical interpretation that like when she's weeping at the end, it's she's weeping for all the lives that she didn't live, you know,
Mhm.
all the stuff that could have been that never happened. Um and that's just a lot to take in. You know, when you don't think you don't think about these things a lot of the time because you're living your life, you're doing things, you're writing for the griot like Brooke is, you're making movies like Brooke is, you know, you have things to do, and then like all of a sudden, an asteroid just comes and hits your life, and then you know in the form of a person that like reminds you of all these things that you experienced, and it's difficult. It's difficult to deal with, you know.
On a cycle, every 12 years, he's going to come and interrupt your
What
life.
happens when she's 12 years down the line? Um, but honestly, one of my favorite shots of the movie is the very final shot, which is you see Haesung in a car on the way to the airport, I guess. And then like you're in a moving, the camera's on a moving vehicle along with him, and you see Haesung kind of like come into view, and you see his face through the window, and he's kind of looking out in the city, and then bloop, he's gone and just like vanished, cut to black. That's the end of the movie, and
Yeah.
I loved it because I think it's just like it shows how ephemeral these kind of visits can be. Like someone comes in, they have such a huge impact, and then boop, they're gone. They're just gone. Like just him in the middle of this big city, you know, it was very poignant to me. I really love that final shot.
It's
So
beautiful. Did you ask Celine? I will go and check it out after this
no
interview.
worries.
But like, did you ask her what it's been like, having this story on screen, or like how her relationship with her husband, has
I I,
been
I
impacted?
I didn't ask her. I think the elements of the movie are autobiographical, but
Yeah.
she did clarify that it's not like a one to one, like everything in the movie has happened in real life, you know. So I would assume, you know, I don't think I would assume that. Nor, by the way, did I want to ask like, what is the nature of your relationship with your husband? Are you disappointed in the life you have together? You know, so I didn't go into that. So I assume they have a very healthy relationship. But yeah, she did clarify that it's like decisions were made to make the movie more interesting and more dramatic, more dramatically interesting. You know, to change it from what her actual life was. So to be clear, to be clear. So all right, well, Brooke, any other thoughts on past lives as we wrap up here today?
I think we covered the gamut. I'm gonna look up Inyan and learn more about that. Because yeah, I definitely uh, I was moved by the idea. I love the idea that there are, like, our life branches off whenever we make a decision, and there's a different version of us that made a different choice. And oh, it kind of actually reminded me of Everything Everywhere All at Once, and that
Hmm.
idea too, that like, you don't have to be sad about the past lives that you didn't get to experience. Like, it's comforting to know that there is a version of you out there who did live those things, and you can kind of draw from it and bring it
Hmm.
into,
I didn't
your
interpret
present
it as like a
life.
multiverse. I thought it was kind of like more of a
No, I agree.
reincarnation kind of thing, right?
It
Yeah.
absolutely, I
Uh,
absolutely agree that it is, it's not about the multiverse, but I
yeah.
still think there are, that's what it made me think of. It made me
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
of, all the, that we don't actually have to be sad and, despondent over, you know, the choices that we made. We're all where we are because this is where we're supposed to be. And, we can take things and bring them into our present life. And if we feel like we made, we wanted to, like, now I'm a filmmaker now, after being a lawyer, after being a journalist, after being 10, like, you can change your life at any point in time too. So don't despair. Enjoy the ride.
Brooke Obie is a filmmaker and a movie critic at The Griot. Thank you so much for chatting with me today, Brooke.
Thank you for having me.